Hello, welcome back to Outbuilding. Today I'm going to install this RedArc Tow Pro Elite brake controller for the trailer in this 2025 Sprinter van. This is version 3, and the older versions have some slight differences that I'll show you in this video. And then the Sprinter van this is 2025. I've looked at some of the bulletins for the 2015s. They have slightly different requirements, but the way I show you this, it should be useful for that. I've also put one of these controllers in a JL Jeep Wrangler, and it had some different requirements, but it's all pretty similar. So this will be helpful for you if you want to put in a controller like this, whether this one or a different one, in a vehicle like this. And it's a little bit different for modern vehicles than old ones. So let's get started. One thing I should note is that this is how I'm doing it, not necessarily a how-to. Although I've done this before, it's going to vary for different vehicles. And so I'm going to try to show you why I'm doing what I'm doing, and then you can make good judgments about how to do that for your particular vehicle or your controller. But this stuff is pretty straightforward, so hopefully what you see here will apply to whatever your circumstance is. So what is a brake controller? A brake controller for trailers takes input, and the input's usually driven by the brake pedal. So when you apply brakes, it's going to add the braking of the trailer to those of the brakes of your vehicle. And when you think about it, the really old cars just used to have a little switch up in front. When you pressed on the brake pedal, that switch would close or open, and that would turn on the brake light. And so what they have done with brake controllers is they've picked that up, and they just said whenever we see that contact get closed, we will turn on the brakes, and that kind of worked. And it's not what they call proportional. That just turns on the brakes full, and the trailer kind of tugs behind the vehicle as it's slowing down. The newer controllers like this one that we're going to use is proportional, and that means that as you brake a little bit, it brakes the trailer a little bit, and as you brake it a whole lot, like if you really step on the brakes, it's going to try to lock up the trailer. And the whole reason you have one of these is so that the trailer doesn't kind of come around and try to swing your vehicle around behind you, because you can imagine, like, this thing can tow around 5,000 pounds, and the vehicle itself may only weigh 6,000 or 7,000 pounds. And so you might have as much mass or even more mass than your vehicle being towed behind you if you've got a big boat or an RV or something. So you go down a big hill, that can start to wag the dog for you, the tail wagging the dog. The trailer can start kind of pushing on the vehicle and maybe even kicking it out and jackknifing it or something in an emergency. So trailer brakes lock up or put braking power to the trailer wheels so that it kind of stays in unison with your vehicle. And if it's proportional, it'll do it to the extent that you're using your brakes, which is what we want here, and that's going to be really nice to use. So on the back of a trailer like this that has brakes, there's a 7-pin connector, and there's a centerpiece, and then 6 conductors on the outside. And they do things like the brake lights and the turn signals and the brake system. And this has got a breakaway system. So there's a little battery on the trailer, and it engages electric brakes on the trailer. So we're gonna have our controller drive these systems on the trailer while we're using the vehicle. So for many cars like the Mercedes here, when you get it, if you get a tow package, you get this big bomb-proof tow bar, and it's got the receiver for your tow hitch, and then they've got the 7-pin connector wired up here. And they've wired up just about everything in it, but not everything. So they've wired up the power to what would be your battery on your trailer. They've wired up a ground. They've wired up the turn signals and the brake lights and the marker lights. But what they haven't given you yet is the relatively high current wire. It tends to be blue in these systems, a blue wire, and that is going to drive the actual trailer brakes. And so that's the system we're going to put in place. And in the Mercedes, and in some, they've done a nice job of prepping it for it. So this wiring harness is in here, and it's all ready to go. And then up under the front seat is a little connector that gives us everything we need to hook our controller up to it. When I did the Jeep JL, I had to put in a kind of a Mopar aftermarket package that was all that wiring that kind of, it laced itself into the turn signals and everything. And it also sent a signal up to the very front of the vehicle. And then you have to hook things up there. So we're going to disengage the power to this van and crack everything open up there, find that connector, and get stuff set up. So there's about 3 things I really like about the RedArc controller, and I haven't used a bunch of these, but probably one of the biggest ones is that this little knob here is all we're going to actually see on the dash of the controller. So it's really discreet, and a lot of these controllers have this kind of bricky thing that sits down underneath your knee, and it's just an invitation to scrape your knee. And so while that's a pretty easy, convenient place to put them, it's not very ergonomically good. So there's this little remote control, essentially, that has a connector on it that's going to go down to our brake controller. And that's kind of nice because this is pretty small, and I'm going to find a spot up in the dash and drill just one hole, put this in. And what I found when I used this before is it's actually really useful to have this thing visible, because when you plug in the controller and you've just got the trailer sitting there and nothing's going on, you'll see this will have a color code. It'll be blue. And that was always really useful to me because it let me know that I had my trailer plugged in correctly. And sometimes I'd look and I wouldn't see that. And that would indicate to me that the connector wasn't, I was getting kind of dirt in there or something. And so just that visual indication of having this visible up on the dash is nice, just to know that your trailer's just set up and that the lights are working. Then when you're using it, as you press the brakes, this thing switches from kind of blue to kind of red, and that's sort of showing you the intensity of how much braking it's doing, and that's also nice. And then the third thing about this one, the Pro version, is that if I'm on say I'm on a gravel, steep downhill road, and I've got my tractor behind me on a trailer. When I go down that road, even though I'm not moving, the trailer still may want to kind of slide or push me even though my wheels aren't moving. And so it has an ability to, you can manually override it, and many of them have this. They have a way that you can sort of engage the trailer brake yourself. So if you could start to feel the vehicle twisting around or the trailer starting to drive you, you can kind of hold down on the manual and actually kind of engage the brakes to straighten you back out. So those are the reasons I picked this. I think there's probably many good controllers, but this one seems to work really well, and that's why I'm picking this one. All right, so under a Sprinter's driver's seat in the US version, where we're left-hand drive, the controls and a lot of electronics are underneath the seat here in this pedestal. And there's the fuse box here that you can get to, and you can get to some of that, but we need to get down in there, and we're gonna wire into a connector that's down in there. To do that, I need to take the seat off, and it has a little connector on there that runs the airbags that are in it. And you don't wanna sort of disengage or unplug any of that stuff while the car is powered, because the car will get really confused and think there's a fault. So I'm going to need to turn off the power, and on many cars you just pull off the battery terminal, but since the battery is down underneath the floor here, they've got a little spot up underneath the dash here that I'm going to reach under, and I'm going to disengage the battery. And they do warn you that you want to do that having not driven the car and run the motor for about 20 minutes, because there's some things like the regen and some of the other systems in the vehicle that stay powered after you turn it off to sort of cool things down and close stuff up, and essentially after that operation. And so this has been sitting for quite some time, haven't been using it, and so I'm going to reach in there and pull that. And it'll reset my clock, and it'll reset the counters for my oil change and a couple other things. But I'm at 500 miles with this vehicle. It's almost brand new, and so I don't need to worry about those things. But it's just something to note. You might want to write down the oil change interval and the other things from your dash info before you disengage the power, because you're going to lose a few of those settings. So hopefully you can see this okay, but I'm just going to reach up above here and pull back on this, and it takes a little bit of a tug, and it snaps out. Then I can reach in there, and there's really no way I could show you in there, but there's a plug, and there's a red button on it, and I just push that red button down and then disengage it. And once I get it off, I'll show it to you here. All right, with this pulled out, I can better show you, but there's a red button, and I just push down on that button there and then pull this thing out, and it sits on a big stud in there. So now I don't have any lights, and the car is dead. So now I'm able to unplug things and do stuff. All right, since this van has swivel seats, I'll spin the seat a little bit. It'll make it easier to show you. Hopefully you can see this. This is the yellow connector that I need to disconnect so that I can pop the seat out. And there's two little tabs that when I get this out, I'll show you these a little bit better. There's a tab on the end here that I pushed out, and a tab on the end here that I pushed out to disconnect this. And then this one over here has a tab, and it comes out. And there's a zip tie there. There's a couple of zip ties that I'm gonna recreate. I'm glad I'm filming this, because I'll recreate them, because you don't want to get this thing bound when you're swiveling the seat. I've got it fairly well disconnected. I'll need to unhook these zip ties and then re-zip tie them when I put it back in. All right, I was able to just kind of push the tabs on this little restraint and slide this thing out of its container. So now I've got the wires disconnected from the seat, and I can start working on the bolts that are holding down the seat. There are 4 of these star nuts on the corners of the seat, in this case the swivel seat system. I don't have that star driver, but a 3/8 inch socket fits on there really pretty tight. I read that somewhere, and so then I'll give that a try. And if it doesn't work, I can go get that socket. But as long as these aren't just torqued amazingly tight, it feels like it should work pretty well. Yeah, it's actually not bad at all. So I'll loosen those up on all 4 corners and kind of swivel the seat. This might be a little bit of a juggle, but I've got the four bolts loosened up. And now I'm going to try tilting the seat back just a little bit and see if I can weave the wiring harness out and make sure it's not stuck on anything. And I can see it here. It goes into a wire loom, but it's pretty well wired up, so I'm going to be a little bit careful and see how much of this I really need to do. I may be able to just kind of reach around in here, so I'm just taking off the panel to see what I need. And I can already see the connector, so I may not take the seat all the way off, just because it's kind of like they've done a really good job of looming it up in there, and I don't really want to undo all that, so I'll try to set it back here and see if I can get to what I need. Well, I can see, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little green connector. That's the connector we want for hooking up the brake controller, but I do kind of want to get this off, so I'm going to turn the camera off and wrestle this with this and see if I can set this back so you can see it better. All right, well, that wasn't too bad. I was able to lay that back on a box and back there, and so I've got the seat open, and you can see there's quite a bit of electronics in here. A lot of this is high power electronics. It's kind of like the main bus bar, and this here is the wire for the brake controller. So there's 4 wires going into it. The little tiny blue wire is the signal wire. That's just a wire coming from some logic that's going to tell us that the brakes are being applied. The bigger wire here that's leaving is the output wire, and that's higher current, and that's going to go all the way back to the trailer connector and run the brakes. And then these other 2 are power and ground. So the red and yellow one is power, and then they use sort of a brown. It looks like, to me, it looks kind of almost black, but that's the ground. And these pins are numbered. If you look I can see on the thing here, they're numbered, and so that can be useful. But I think it's because I know in 2015 models they don't use blue, they use black and something else for these 2 wires. I would stick with the notion of the small one being the signal and the big one being the output. So you're going to power the controller, you're going to pick up a signal, and you're going to modify it and control the brakes. So now we'll get to the other side of this and look at the connector we're going to build up to hook into that green connector. So there's a few choices for what to do with the receiving end of this cable, so the female side of this. Mercedes in their upfitter guide has this green thing and the little crimps in there specified, and they're parts you could go try to track down. And I've just dealt with enough with crimps and stuff to know that that's kind of a hassle to get those to crimp really well and do everything and find them, and I don't have the crimper tool specific to that. So I just bought this cable online. It's actually kind of the wrong one for this. It does fit the Sprinter on this side, but the color coding of these cables isn't correct. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to loosely plug this together and not click it shut so that I know what I'm getting. And I know what the cables coming out of the Mercedes are. And so I'm just going to do a little translation. So the Mercedes, for instance, the Mercedes red cable, which is the red and yellow one here, comes out white on my other side. So I will say that the power is white. And then the Mercedes ground wire, and this connector can only plug one way, so you're not going to get it wrong. So the Mercedes ground wire comes out on the other side as blue on this one. And then the signal, which is the little tiny wire, the little tiny blue wire, comes out on my connector here as red. And that leaves the only other one, which is the control wire, going essentially from the controller back to the Mercedes, is the bigger blue wire here, and on my connector it's black. So now I know kind of what the translation is between the Mercedes side and this connector that I'm going to use, and I'm going to just cut this off. I'm going to cut this off because I'm going to tuck my controller right in here, and I'm going to put the RedArc other half of this on here. So I'm not going to use the rest of this cable, and I'm certainly not going to use the plug there. And I think there is a way you can get this is a 3036, and I think you can, this is a 3030. I think you can get a 3036, and then you can get yet another connector that goes from here to the RedArc, and I just didn't want to have all those connectors and all that much cable in there. So I'm going to cut this off, and I'll go to the bench, and I'll splice this into the RedArc connector, and then we'll install it in here. All right, so I peeled back the sheath on this, and I'm only going to use a little bit of this, and I'll stagger these splices. And it's interesting that these 4 wire colors are the same, and if I could repin this, I could get them to match that of the RedArc. And the RedArc's really nice. It actually says battery plus, battery minus, brake. It's actually written on the cable here, which is really nice. But I'm going to match those up to my little coding that I came up so that I've got the Sprinter. So these colors won't match, but the intentions of them will. So I'll start one at a time and splice these up. I'm just doing these one at a time, and I'm cutting them on both sides, stripping them, lacing them together, and then soldering them just so I have a really positive connection. And I have some really tiny solder, so I have to feed a bunch in there. But anyway, I'm also sliding a piece of shrink wrap or shrink tubing on there. It's marine grade, so it's even waterproof. And I'm sliding that on there, and when I'm done, I'll shrink wrap all those after I verify that I've got my sort of translation set up between the Mercedes on one side and the RedArc on the other side with the 4 connections. With all those connections put together, I just took some black electrical tape and just laced it up a little bit so that I had a clean little neat harness. All right, so this is the actual controller, so I'll find a spot to put it in here, and then this connector piece I've made now connects, like, you know, one side will go to that and the other side will go to the Mercedes. So that gets us the control side, and then there's a little remote control that plugs in the other side that is going to go to the actual knob that we're going to use. And I need to find a path for that knob, and I have a notion of how to do that. I'm going to pull the floor mats out here and see if I can't find a path through the battery bay up to the front and see how that works. And so I haven't done this before. I think it should work, but we'll see. Pop the mat out, and then there's sort of a floor plate with a couple of screws that need to be removed here. So I'll grab my, looks like Torx things, and there's a little sign for battery. So you pull this little piece off. I think that gives you access to the door underneath here. And that thing just looks like it just pops out, and then I believe I can lift up the flooring here with that out and get to, there's the battery box down there. So this just pops out as well. And it looks like I've got a few more Torx screws to pull that thing off. All right, so there we got the battery. So now what I'm thinking is that there's a handy little tray or a little slot through here that I can hopefully feed the snake the control wire through, and then I'll run along the side of the battery here and up where these wires, these are the main batteries going up in to that cutoff where they continue. So the control wire goes from a little knob, and this is something that changed. The older RedArc kits used to use an RJ45, which is just a computer cable, like an Ethernet cable, and they let you extend that with whatever kind of Ethernet cable length you wanted. They've switched to a different connector. I'm sure that was probably not as robust as they hoped or something, and so they give you a piece that's probably about 1 meter or 39 inches long, and that I kind of measured before I started, and I think that would be just shy of it, so I wanted to give myself plenty of space. So they do make a remote, what is it, remote hardware kit or something like that, that's 2 meters long. That should give me more than enough space to kind of fish things around, and so I didn't want to be like right at the end of it, and so I got this extra cable, so that was a little bit of an extra expense. But it's probably a little bit more reliable than the old RJ45 they used to use. So if you're using a version 2, this is a version 3 of the RedArc kit, and if you're using a version 2 or earlier, I think it used a computer cable, so you could do that. So it's a little tough for me to see where the stuff comes out on the other side in this box, but I'm going to try just feeding this alongside the battery cable there and see if I can get it to go through. I can use like a fiberglass fish tape or something if I need to, but see if it just snakes through there and pops out. All right, I think I've got a plan here. There's this little piece here, it's just pushed down on these little studs, so it pries up and you can push it back down. And then you can see there's sort of two corridors in there. One of them's got the big battery cable going down it, and the other one was free, and so I was able to weave that through. So with a bit of effort, I was able to get that to come through. We don't need much of it in here, but we need just enough to plug into the controller wherever we stabilize it. And then fiddled it a little bit to get it to fit with the cleanest path through behind the battery wiring. And then I can just push that back down on.
wire loom, and then feed it through the battery bay here and up into the dash, and then we can start worrying about that.
So for routing through the dash, I went ahead and pulled this drink holder up and off, and there's a little spot right in the middle that looks like it was made for a switch or something, and I fed the wire up through there. It was easy to get to, and I kind of goofed the camera up here so I didn't show that process, but it just popped right off using the edges with my fingers and just and pulled it out. So I took it into the workbench to drill a hole and mount the controller. All right, now I need to drill a hole, which is a little freaky, but I figure this piece of plastic is probably one I could get a new one if I need to. And I'm just gonna center it at about 2 inches down. And I'm just starting with a little pilot hole first. Open that up a little bit. And then they want 10 millimeters as the final hole, which is one of the few metric bits I have. So the controller starts with a little sticker that's just stuck on right on centered around the hole. So that's just like a little indicator that shows where 0 is. And then this thing should go through. Actually, it doesn't quite go through. This thing screws down into it. And then I think we want to turn it all the way to one side, which would be 0. And then put the little knob on, matching that 0. And then you can open it up to turn it up and down to turn it off. Pretty clean. All right, so then with that all put in place, I can connect this up and then go ahead and remount this thing, which should just snap back down in. Kind of looks like it was meant to be there. All right, now I start buttoning my way back. So I got this wire tucked neatly between the others, going back to a little connector. Got that pressed back down. So then this battery plate just is sort of keyed over those holes, and just drops back in, slides up, and then I can tighten it down. So I resecured that battery plate, and then I looked over my wiring one more time and did just a sanity check to make sure I had everything correct. So now I've got the right stuff going from the Mercedes to my RedArc, so I can plug it in. And then I've got my wire coming through, going over to my little control module, and it plugs in right here. So now everything's all wired up, and the only thing left to do is this thing here works with inertia, and so it can't float around in there and wiggle. It's got to stay put. So I got to find a place to zip tighten. It doesn't have to be in any particular orientation. It just has to be fixed and not moving around. So I'm kind of liking something like that, maybe. Find a spot for it here and then it zip tied in. It may just sit on the floor in there if I can unplug this and route around, which I should have done anyway probably. All right, with a little messing around, I found a good spot here and got it zip tied in on this little fuse holder, and it's in nice and sturdy. Get to the cables on both sides if I ever need to. And I think I'm good to go. Start putting stuff back together. Now this might be a little bit challenging to put the seat back on without stressing those wires at all. But I think I can get it sort of set up here and then position everything once I've got it up here. This just took some back and forth, but worked out pretty well, and I went ahead and loosely put in the bolts once I got everything positioned and squared away. So I'm just going through and tightening everything back up. I got the wire looms all plugged back together the way I had them when it started, and it really is pretty easy to take this on and off with the swivel seat just slightly swiveled so that you can get to these bolts. And then I just need to put away a couple things and plug the power back in, and then I can give it a test. Well, I reached back in and plugged that back in. It's kind of hard to get in there. There's probably a way to get that door all the way off, but I was able to get in there with just my hand and turn it back on. Got power, everything looks like it's up and going again, and I'll give it a little test drive and see what it does. All right, I'm not sure if you can see this, but I've got it plugged in now, and this is the first time I've driven it, so it's blinking green, which means that it's training itself. So it's going to use its little accelerometers as I stop and go a few times here, and then once it'll turn blue once it's kind of learned itself. But I'm going to drive a little bit. I won't have the camera on while I'm doing it, and I'll take a few starts and stops and train it. Okay, I started and then I stopped twice, and now I've got green and blue, so it's sort of showing me that it's training, and I'll do one more start and stop here and show you. So I'm just getting up to like 15, 20 miles an hour, and then just stopping with fairly quickly. And so it's a little bit more blue now, and I'll speed up one more time. And stop. And it's almost all blue. All right, now it's all blue. So now it's trained, and it knows, what the orientation of that thing is, and so it knows when it starts to feel a deceleration, because the accelerometer in it knows to start to slow down. So now I'll go and I'll drive down a hill, and I'll show you I'll test it and make sure it works. So I had it turned down to like 0. And I know with an empty trailer, 3 should make it kind of jump around. So I'll drive around the block and get to a hill. Now I'm at the top of a pretty big hill, so I'll turn it up to like 4 or 5, and you can see when I let go, it's going to turn blue, get rolling down the hill, and this should actually kind of make the trailer kind of skid behind me. And I could hear it back there skidding, so it's going. Now if I turn this down to like 1 or 2, that's what it normally works with. That works well with an empty trailer. So now when I stop, it applies the brakes back there, but it doesn't make it bounce around. And then the only other thing I can do is I can push the button down, and then I can control the braking myself. All right, well, that worked out well. One thing I didn't expect when I got in the Mercedes and had it plugged in is that the Mercedes, the Sprinter, detects that there's a trailer back here, and it asks you for what kind of profile the trailer has. And one profile is just for like a bike rack, one's for a small lightweight utility trailer, which I would classify this as, and one's for a big RV. And I think it has slightly different settings for how it's going to handle shifting and other things when you're in towing mode. And so it's nice to see that it sort of recognizes that. I'll be curious as I put in different trailers whether it can tell between them or whether it just does that every time you plug in a trailer. I wasn't expecting that, but it's not surprising at all. And then the trailer controller worked great. Once I did a couple, I think it was 5 stops total, it just trained it each time, and then it's been solid blue since then. And like I said, it's really nice to have that indicator out and visible so that when you get in the car after plugging in, like I plugged this in and I hadn't pushed the connector in far enough, and I didn't see that any kind of indication yet, and that told me that I didn't have it plugged in. You can always check your lights and stuff too, but that indicator from inside the cab is nice to see, and it tells you that the controller's up and running and everything's plugged in and it's working. The stock Mercedes wiring is nice because it's got everything plumbed up there. If you're doing your own wiring, you're going to have to bring that all the way up from the trailer connector and back all the way up into the front. Plus, you're going to have to tap the power, probably run it through like a 30 amp fuse and provide fused power to the trailer connector. That Mercedes just has a 7-pin connector, which is, you know, that's great. But there's a lot of little trailers that use this 4-blade style, like a 4-pin connector. And so this was really inexpensive. It was like $10 or something. It plugs into the 7, gives you the 4, and has some little LED indicator lights to show you that things are working. So I'll just keep that in the van, and when I need to use our little trailer or any other little trailer that has a 4-pin connector, I can flip that on there and use it. The brakes won't do anything when you do that. It'll just be the lights and the indicators, but it's still useful to have. My tail lights work and everything else works. It seemed to work just like the other one did when I had it in the Jeep, and that was great. So this will be really nice to have. I can have big loads like the tractor back here with an empty van and feel a little bit more secure. When the van's pretty loaded down, like if you have, you know, a couple thousand pounds in the van and then you're towing, it's probably going to be much more stable just because you've got some weight over the back wheels. But you want to watch for, especially if you only have a 2-wheel drive van, if you've got, you know, an empty van with some weight in back. All right, well, that was the first sort of minimal mod, but pretty much a required one for be able to use the trailer with the brakes. Hopefully that's helpful for you, even if you're putting it into a different kind of car or putting in a different kind of controller. It's pretty similar stuff. It's nice to have that in there, so now we can tow bigger things like the tractor and not think about it so much. So if this has been helpful for you and you want to see more about the van build out as we do things, please subscribe, and I'll keep a playlist going of the van changes as we do them. And I do all kinds of other projects as well, so you might be interested in some of those. If you're not interested in subscribing or the van, but this was helpful for you, put in a like because that helps me as well. And until I see you next, I'll be out building. Thanks again for watching. Take care.